Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
And welcome back, everybody. I want you to think about something for just a moment. Everything you do during your day when you interact with people, either verbally or through an email, any kind of communication involves just that, communication. You are communicating. So think of it this way. Imagine if you communicated more effectively, more to the point, clearer, concise. We're going to help you with that today because it's a game changer. Think about it in your job. Think about it in your relationships. I was on a call last night for an hour and 20 minutes with a friend. Could have been shorter. It was wonderful, but it could have been shorter. Communication is key. With that comes storytelling. Everything you do is really a story. Even if you talk about something related to work, something that's going on, there's a story involved in that. Let's help you move that forward and effectively do it. She is a storytelling coach. She helps people with their communication all the time. Learn so much from her along the way here in these last few podcasts. Michelle Cutler joins us once again here on the program. How are you doing today?
I'm really well. Thank you. Excited to be back.
Yeah, it's great to have you back here. By the way, I have a couple of emails I want to read from people apparently that you've worked with. And by the way, you can reach us at instantfeedbacksteve@gmail.com. We're going to talk about brainstorming, how to come up with ideas and how to put your communication thoughts together in just a moment. But I wanted to share this. And I think it's just so cool. People check in and talk about their experiences with you.
Cool.
Her name is Carol Duff, and she says, you helped me craft my story, looking back in order to make sense of the past in order to be able to move forward. Key point right there. That has become my brand, the healing that can take place during the third season of life. My story necessarily involves other people, including my husband's deceased daughter. And she goes on to talk about, oh, she actually has a question. I just saw this. How do you establish a brand without appropriating others' stories? Interesting.
Oh, that is interesting. And I would say in the case of what she's speaking about, because her story that she just published a book called Wisdom Builds Her House, which I was a part of her working on that during different phases over the course of a year, that a lot of that story is based on her discovery of someone else's journals, someone who had passed away. And a big conversation we had was, where is your story? This is someone else's story. What's your story? What are you taking from this that then becomes yours, so that you're not appropriating their experiences or capitalizing off of their experiences? So always, you want to always go back to the point of view of the writer, or of you as the storyteller. It's your point of view. So even if you are listening to a piece of news, right? We all are listening to the same headlines right now, for example, about elections, just for example. Someone coming to me and telling me what they just heard about the elections, I can read that on my own. I don't need to hear that again. Your take on it, or in some way how it might impact you personally, or in some way, what is your opinion or your values? Like, where do you come into the picture as the communicator, as the person as the messenger in a way? So I think in the idea of brand, where your brand is your voice is your brand. So no, and again, this sort of leads into where the brainstorming is that you really, really have to get to know yourself really well to know the difference between appropriation and originality. Or like you and I spoke about in the early days, this idea of authenticity. My experience is different from yours, but we're both here together having this podcast. If I were to sit down and write my experience of this time with you, Steve, I would have my side with my pillows in front of me, as I told you about, to dampen my sound. And you would have your side of the story with your whirring analog mixer in the background. No one else would know these stories, and no one else would know that we were even in the same place. So I think it's important to be very much in your own experience when you're testing out these ideas, testing out a story.
So I have a thought based on that. And what you said The three words is the game changer in what we're discussing here. Point of view. It's your point of view. I take that, and of course, it's key because it's what your story that you're telling based on other pieces of maybe somebody else's story, but taking your point of view and making it interesting for others, either interesting or relatable. Because, I could tell you I got up this morning, I brushed my teeth, all right, big deal. How is that relatable to somebody else? My thinking is you always want to think how they're how they're going to benefit from your point of view. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I would also say it's funny that you chose that example. It was something I was thinking about after we spoke last week, which is this idea of starting a story from the beginning. Like often they say, don't. If I ever read, I've read this in when you're going to submit a story to a magazine or to a literary journal, or even a movie. It's like, don't start with waking up in the morning. Never start with waking up in the morning, right?
Yeah.
But mind you, the Beatles wrote a great song about woke up, got out of bed, dragged a comb across my head. And
Yes.
you've got, Kafka, the Metamorphosis begins with Gregor Samsa waking up in his bed in the form of a bug. So we know that there are no rules in that regard. You can start with, I woke up in the morning and I brushed my teeth. That might take you somewhere. That might don't if you edit yourself, again, this is sort of leading into brainstorming. If you edit yourself before you've even gone down the path, you might be cutting off opportunities. You could also say, brushing your teeth, what's the second or third or fourth thought you have about it? Not the first thought, but the second or the third or the fourth. So
Can I
you could
share
say,
one? I've got one,
yeah,
right?
please,
And
please,
I think
yeah,
it's
like go
relatable.
for it.
So you ever wake up in the morning and brush your teeth? I did it this morning and then have orange juice. It is the worst experience you could ever have. It's like, yeah, especially when you're half asleep first thing in the morning. It's this tangy, crazy kind of flavor. I just want sweet goodness from my orange juice. So, I always think about that. Yeah, either I'm going to have the orange juice first, then brush my teeth. So what I'm doing here is like I'm trying to bring it so it's relatable because I think we all know what that tastes like.
Okay, so I will take that one step further. And I would say then, if it's not the first time you've had the experience, right? I'm sure it's not the first time in your life you've brushed your teeth with mint and then had orange juice. And I think most people, again, in the Western world who have orange juice in their diet, could probably say they've had that. So it is relatable. The way I could take it a bit further is to say, if you've had that experience before and you know that it happens, why did you do it? So why do we repeat things that we already know we don't want? And then you could it gets a little more analytical, a little more philosophical, but it's still a jumping off point, right? Just from a simple moment in the day can
Sure.
go much bigger.
Yeah. Why do I repeat it? Because I wonder if it's as bad as it really was last time. Can it get better? And can I grow to enjoy it?
Yeah, I love it.
For me, no, I've tried. It's just like, I love the sweetness and the health benefits of orange juice, but it just doesn't, they don't like each other. They
We
don't
don't
work
like
well.
each other.
Does anybody like
Right.
it? Does anybody like minty toothpaste and then drinking orange juice? I'm curious.
I hope the phones light up for that question. But
Right.
I would imagine, and this is crazy to say, but I would imagine that there's some kind of alcohol drink or shot at the bar that probably is exactly that. I'll bet you there are so many flavors now in alcohol and in
Hmm.
barbecue sauce for some
Interesting.
reason. So there might be a minty orange barbecue sauce.
You're interesting thought. Like if you combine like Rumpelmans and maybe orange vodka, we call it, hey, can I get an orange Colgate? A couple of shots of that, please.
Exactly,
Um,
exactly. Now
you know
do you
what we're
see what we
doing?
just did? Yeah,
Go ahead,
we're
say it.
creating products. No, I mean, we're creating brand. We're creating a product right now. We are brainstorming.
We are
This is
brainstorming.
it's our little think tank moment. If we
Right.
were, let's say, working for Coca-Cola, we might be coming up with a new product, right? So we just took the most simple thing of
Right.
of your morning, and we could really spend the next half hour going off on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I view it like playing tennis. So I hit the ball over the net, or you did, and back and forth. We go back and forth, and the game continues until eventually there's a win. And it's a win for both, eventually when you get there. Or maybe you're helping somebody else brainstorm. But, and I'm in the process of doing this now with somebody who came back into my life, yeah, just an acquaintance. Really, the father of one of my daughter's friends who she hung with in school a short period of time. He moved away 3 years ago, and we're going to collaborate on a project. And he reached out to me as I was thinking of doing the same exact thing. And even though he lives about 3 hours away, he's going to come back here and we're going to work on it. But my point here is brainstorming. Like I could have done this project a long time ago. I've thought about it. I was like, I'm not really into it. You need somebody else to brainstorm with, whoever that might. You can't brainstorm alone. It's not brainstorming.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's true. I mean, there are some things you can do. I do have a few things you can do actually to do on your own. I think to start to build up your bank of
Sure.
ideas, but again, when you're like you're saying, when you hit a certain point, lobbying off with somebody
Right.
is really useful. So, when if you were to work with me and you were to come in with some ideas, we would start working with those ideas. But if you were to come in and say, I feel like I want to work on this new drink at my restaurant that's like orange and mint, but I'm not exactly sure what it is, then we might, do some prompts. We would do some generative workshopping so that again, in a way, and I think I told this story in an earlier episode about my father, this idea of like you start in one place and then you sort of tangentially build out with freedom, like without editing yourself, without censoring yourself, just build out, and then you can always come back to where you started.
Sure.
I, a big part of brainstorming, again, I feel is that you do not censor yourself. You feel safe in the sense that if you're writing that someone isn't going to come read what you wrote, that you can, if you're voice recording, someone's not going to listen in, that you have the freedom. If you are working with me, it's always a safe environment because I'm just always open to hear what someone has to say. I've heard of people who feel judged by maybe their background or perhaps their, and I hate to use the word lack, so I'm going to put it in quotes, like lack of quote formal education, or this feeling that they're doing it wrong. Perhaps they've had a bad experience in school or with a boss or somebody who's made them feel wrong for having ideas. A lot of times good ideas are threatening to people. So,
Hmm.
you need to spend the time for yourself, invest in yourself to have these, what I'm calling like a bank or your own database of ideas that are yours. They call it IP, your intellectual property. And there's a number of ways that you can do that just on your own. And, I don't know if there's another question you want to read before I get into it, or I could start to tell you a story about that as well.
We do have a couple of questions. Your choice. We could do that, or we could continue here.
Well, okay. Let me start. I'll start with one thing, with a story. Like we
Sure.
always like to have a little story. And this story sort of leads into this other idea, one of the prompts or one of the ways you brainstorm, which is image boarding, right? So
Yes.
as you go, right, you can do it. I have, if you can see, you can't see, but off to my left here, I have two very large cork boards on my wall so that I have, for one project, I have research, anything that reminds me of what I'm working on. If there's any moment I'm sitting at my desk here and I'm like, oh shoot, I want to go back to what was it? Where was I? I just look over at the board and I go, oh yeah. And I see dates or I see images or I see
Hmm.
photographs, quotes, things that are inspirational to me for this particular project. Um, But I sort of learned this when my first ever interview to be a screenwriter, which was actually started as a treatment writer, as a narrative treatment writer, which is basically the narrative of the movie, not in screenplay format. I was called into this very big director's war room. We were calling it the war room because it was for a big action movie, a heist action movie, and he had like 10 panels, and each panel had images from different movies, from photojournalism, just all of these things, so that he could pitch. He verbally pitched me his movie. It took 4 hours. Okay. He went through every panel. He saw this entire movie just by looking at this image board until he got to the ending. And I was like, well, what's the ending? How does it end? And he didn't have an ending. And so, how did I snag this job? Which was that I looked around at his boards and I saw a lot of fire, like a lot of explosions and flames. Just, it was an action movie, right? Heist movie. There had been one scene that started in Alaska, so there was a lot of snow. And then that character we follow, but we never pick it back up. We just sort of lose that. And I said to him, I think you should end Alaska. Like, I think it should end quiet. It should be cold. It should be solitary, because we've just spent like 2 hours in explosions and full action. And that's how I got the job, because that became the ending of the movie.
Wow.
But I would not have been able to, I think it was having all of the images around me that made it so easy to see, right? He couldn't see it because he was so not overwhelmed, but so full of all of these high points, action and stakes, that the personal moment wasn't visible to him. So again, I see that as a good lesson, to have this image board, something that keeps you connected to your ideas. If we were talking about a small business, if it's your brand, if it's the colors, your color palette, things that historical images from your own past, just things that you feel really connected to, that would never be assembled by anybody else but you. And I
It's so
think that's a
true
good starting place.
with brainstorming, because in the example of that gentleman, he was already deep in. He jumped in the hole of, the explosions, and he's already in there. He can't see the forest through the trees, if you will, a different view of that. And the whiteboard, you were reading my mind, because it took me back before you even said it. I was thinking, and I was going to share it. You already did, of a company that I've worked with, and I still do some work with them. And they do a brainstorming session. They invite everybody in. Doesn't matter if you're creative, everybody comes in. They present the challenge, and there are no wrong answers. And they have those huge pads. There's like 3 feet by 2 feet, white paper, and you keep changing it. Or they're like giant sticky notes, and you put them up on the wall.
Yep.
And somebody
Yep.
facilitates and just writes. All right, so what about this? Okay, let's go on. And it's different funnels or different sticky pages of topics. All right, so we need a name for that drink. The one with the tangy flavor there. What? All right, what do we
Yeah,
got for
yeah.
names? Let's go. And then in the end, with everything in front of you, then they start voting on it. And then you have maybe 5 different pieces of the puzzle. Let's go to a question. This
Sure.
is Erica, and she checks in to say, how do you help clients find their unique voice and style?
Well, I think that goes back to, well, one thing that helps first off is, I would say, like, the repetition, the continuation of the relationship. So you and I are on our 5th or 6th call together. We have a much better rapport than on our first call together. We were sort of feeling each other out, seeing what each other knows, hearing each other out, right? And now we're at a point where I understand better your pattern, your timing. You might, it seems, understand mine. And so that immediately begins, I can start to hear Steve's voice, right? I start to hear your voice, how you tell a story, what's important to you. And then I ask a lot of questions. So I'm big on listening, and I'm big on questions. I think a person, this idea of the unique voice really comes from, again, not being afraid to speak your mind, like just to say, even if it sounds stupid or inflammatory by accident, or any of these things that we are all afraid to do socially, like in social media, where you can have a big backlash for speaking your mind. In a private setting, it's really the best way to get to the heart of what you're trying to say, because sometimes you come to an idea with anger, for example, or resentment, but that's not the message you want to put out, right? You're angry about something, get that out, like get those words out, get it out, because somewhere in there is the story you're trying to tell, right? You're not trying to make people angry, and you don't want people to feel you're angry at them. So again, it comes from repetition. It comes from practice, really. And then you start to hear your unique voice yourself, right? You start to hear it as you're writing or as you're speaking. I'm kind of learning it as I go with you here, because I usually work in writing. I'm not usually a public speaker. I usually work in private sessions, or I work, for clients and we're actually writing. So this is a learning curve for me, and I'm listening back to my podcast, my recordings with you, and I'm like, that's interesting that I do that. I don't, you just have to become familiar with yourself, I think, and that takes time, patience, confidence, trust.
Confidence and trust in yourself and the way you're going to tell a story and how you put the piece. Do you do this? Do you, before you're going to say something, let's say a story. Oh, yeah, I just got a memory. Do you piece it in your mind before you verbalize it? I'm in microseconds. You're just thinking of like, and you go.
I do, but I would say that's for two reasons. One being I kind of have like a hyperactive brain, so that's just sort of how my brain kind of works. But also, I've spent a lot of time I consider like our minds like storage. I think David Bowie sings it in like 5 years. Like my brain was like a warehouse; it had no room to spare. Like our heads are full all the time of things, and you actually have to sort of declutter and take some of these things out. I find writing really does that. It doesn't even have to be writing that you share, but it really does help to sort of, loosen the gears a little bit. And then some of those stories are more accessible to you because you've already been playing with them in sort of your own space. So I think, I can tell a story pretty quickly. I can sit while someone's talking and maybe think of 3 or 4 stories, but I would still be listening to them. Like I'm just following what they have to say. I love hearing people tell stories.
Same.
So I'm always there with you. I don't feel like I need to be heard also. I don't feel like if we work in a session together, I don't also tell you all of my stories, but I might drop in 1 or 2 things from my stories just to loosen it up a little bit, just again to create that trust. I'm willing to share as well. Like I'm here, I'm open, I'm here and ready. Tell me what you got. And I think that again, it creates this trust, which is really important.
Interesting exercise in writing things down, because I don't do it. And I'm going to show you. Well, it's over there. I just started doing it about a half hour ago in the project that I'm working on with the person that came back into my life. And I had a bunch of notebooks, brand new, never even use them. I'm like, I need to start writing this stuff down. I'm not even kidding. This is like 30 minutes ago, I started doing it.
There you go.
And I look at it in 2 ways when you write things down. Now, there's 2 ways to do it. The one way is you just throw all your ideas on a page. The other way is to collect your thoughts and declutter and maybe edit as you're writing as an exercise to get to the point a little sooner and just kind of prime your brain, train your brain to get there quicker. For me, I think I do it so many years talking over intros on songs. I really think that that's my laser. That's my, you got 14 seconds, talk, get it done.
Okay. So I would say in that case, if you I'm going to use it as an opportunity to help. If you were to be handwrite it first, Don't let it all out, and
Yes.
then type up your own notes. And when you type up your own notes, you are editing in that way.
For sure.
But you're letting your initial brainstorm out without a compositional feel.
Right.
But you can work with me. I'll get it in now. You can contact me or work with me, or even just sign up for the newsletter, which sometimes I give prompts and other suggestions for how to come up with ideas at www.michellecutler.com, which is MICHELLECUTLER.com. That's probably the easiest way to find me. I'm also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, sort of on Twitter, X sometimes. So anyway, I really would be open to hearing from anybody who has some ideas.
Sure. And you won't judge. You won't pick somebody's email apart.
No, definitely not.
Yeah, but it's great for a point you bring up there. And you don't want to edit it immediately. You want to throw those ideas out because you might miss a little nugget of something. But if you're self-editing, man, I'm going to leave that out. And you might later realize, oh, wow, that was actually a nice little piece of that story. It's wonderful talking with you today.
Sometimes that can actually be you too. It was so good.
Yeah, it seems at the end here we have a little it's a little blippy in the
Crunch.
in the Wi-Fi.
A little crunchy.
Yeah, all good.
A little crunchy, but we're good here now.
Yep, MichelleCutler.com. Everybody's got a story. Tell yours the best way and communicate in an even better way in all areas of your life. Thanks for today. We'll talk soon, okay?
Yep, sounds good.
Thanks. We'll be right back.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house.
And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.